The human fleet was floating in the deep dark of space, stars shining like cold lights far away. But no one on the bridge of the warship was looking at them. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the tactical screens, and those screens were filling. With red dots, the enemy ships, there were so many of them that the red seemed to spread like a wave across the display. Commander Ethan Cole sat in the captain's chair, his face calm but his mind sharp. The dim blue light of the bridge made the lines on his face look deeper. The voices of the other commanders from different ships were coming through the comm channel. Some of them were shouting, some sounded scared, and many of them kept repeating the same thing: retreat, pull back, save what we can, they said. The enemy was too many, too strong, and too ready. On the outer edges of the fleet, ships from other allied alien worlds had already started to turn away, their engines glowing as they left the battle area. These ships didn't want to fight a battle they thought they couldn't win. Some had fought with humans before, but they believed this was different. They wanted to survive, and survival to them meant leaving now. But Ethan kept looking at the center of the screen, at the biggest cluster of red enemy warships that were moving straight toward the human fleet. They were massive, their hulls lined with weapons, and they carried the confidence of a force that thought victory was certain. Ethan could feel his jaw tighten. The air on the bridge felt heavy, the kind of weight that came before history decided what it would remember. The voice of Admiral Corrin came through next, calm but cold. His tone was one of final command. Humans, fall back. It wasn't a request. It was an order from the highest authority in the Allied command. Other ships were already acknowledging the order, their captains saying, understood, or moving to retreat coordinates. But Ethan's hand reached out and switched off the channel. The sound cut to silence. The crew on his bridge didn't speak. The tension made every breath loud. Their hands hovered over control panels, waiting for a command that could decide if they lived or died. Some of them glanced at each other, wondering if Ethan would follow the order or do something reckless. No one wanted to be the first to ask. Ethan leaned forward in his chair, his voice low but strong. We fight, he said. The words cut through the silence like a blade. No one moved for a second. Then, one by one, the crew returned their eyes to their stations. A few nodded. Others set their jaws. The decision was made. On the large forward window of the bridge, the enemy fleet was now visible as tiny shapes far away. They were coming fast, glowing lights from their engines pushing them closer every second. Ethan knew that in a few minutes, the void between them would turn into a killing ground. Railguns would fire, missiles would streak through the black. Ships would be torn apart. He thought of the men and women on the other ships in his command. People who had trained, fought, and bled beside him for years. They were not the kind to run from a fight just because the numbers looked bad. He knew the history of humanity, how on Earth, long before space travel, humans had stood their ground in worse situations, against greater odds, and somehow had clawed out victory. On the comms, his own officers began to relay his decision to the rest of the human ships. All units hold position, prepare for engagement. The words carried a spark, a change in the air. Those who had been bracing for retreat now straightened in their chairs, their voices steadier as they confirmed orders. Engineering crews rushed to check reactor levels. Weapons teams loaded fresh rounds into the railguns. Pilots strapped into fighter cockpits. The ship's hum grew louder as systems shifted to full combat readiness. Red battle lights flickered across the walls. Screens changed to targeting data. And the heartbeat of the Valor-class warship seemed to quicken. Ethan watched it all with a calm face, but inside, his blood was alive. This was not just defiance. It was a statement humans did not step back when the galaxy told them to. Through the glass of the bridge, one could see distant flashes of light as the first wave of alien allies who had stayed behind began taking fire. Their shields flaring under enemy hits, Some ships were already breaking apart. The enemy's firepower was enormous, but Ethan didn't blink. Target their forward elements, T ordered quietly, and the bridge came to life with movement. Somewhere deep in the ship, the crew in the gunnery deck swung massive railgun. Barrels into position, their motors whining as they locked on. Missile launchers adjusted their aim, and point defense turrets rotated. Ready to catch incoming fire, the ship's engines shifted, not to move away, but to anchor into an attack. Position. One of his younger officers, voice trembling, said, "Sir, if we stay, we might not make it." Ethan turned to look at him, his eyes steady. "If we run, we definitely won't make it, not in the way that matters." The officer didn't speak again. But his back straightened and his hands moved faster over the controls outside. The stars seemed to shift as the enemy closed in. The countdown to contact ticked away in Ethan's mind. There was no guarantee of survival. But there was a guarantee that every second they held this line would mean something. Maybe for humanity's allies, maybe for Earth itself. Maybe for the idea that humans were more than just another race in the galaxy. They were fighters, and they did not yield. And so, while the rest of the Allied fleet fled into the darkness, the human warships formed a wall of steel and defiance. Their commanders linked by unspoken agreement. Their crews braced for the storm that was coming. The order to retreat was gone, replaced by the decision to fight harder than ever, because sometimes in war the only way forward is through. And humanity had just chosen that path. Ethan didn't think about what would be written in history books, or whether there would be anyone left to write them. He only thought about the next few minutes, the fight, the survival of his people, and the enemy ahead who thought they could break human will. The bridge lights reflected in his eyes as he whispered to himself, "Let's show them." And somewhere deep in the hull, the warship's guns came alive, ready to speak for humanity in the oldest language of war, across the fleet. Ethan's decision to fight spread like a signal fire in the night. On the warship Valor, Captain Claire Monroe stood on the bridge, her eyes scanning the swirling tactical display. She had fought alongside Ethan before. She knew he wasn't the type to gamble without reason. If he was staying, so was she. Her ship wasn't the fastest or the most advanced. Its hull was scratched and dented from past battles, and some of the paint on its nameplate was faded. But to Claire, the Valor was more than metal. It was home, and the crew who served on it were like family. The engineering deck was a storm of motion. Mechanics in grease-streaked uniforms raced between reactor consoles and power conduits, welding. Sparks lit the air as damaged panels were sealed. The chief engineer, a big man named Carter, barked orders over the roar of machinery. "Overcharge the railguns. I don't care if it cooks the coils. We need maximum output." Down in the fighter bays, pilots were strapping into their sleek interceptors. The smell of engine fuel sharpened the air. They didn't speak much, just checked their weapons, ran diagnostics, and exchanged brief nods with the deck crews, each one knowing the odds, but also knowing the value of a clean shot at the enemy. In the mess hall, Marines sat around steel tables, eating what could be their last meal. The chatter was low, more like a quiet hum than a conversation. One young Marine folded a piece of paper and tucked it into his armor, a letter for someone back home that might never be sent. On the bridge, Claire's voice carried over the ship's intercom, steady and clear. "Crew of the Valor, you all know what's coming. The enemy outnumbers us, and they expect us to run, but we are staying. We are holding the line, and we are going to make them regret stepping into our range." The words didn't roar. They didn't need to. They were like steel sliding into place around the fleet. Other human captains prepared in their own ways. Some double-checked weapon reserves. Others spoke to their crews face to face. Promising to lead from the front, Ethan's flagship relayed firing coordinates and formation orders, arranging the fleet into a tight defensive wall, nose to nose, hull to hull, ready to focus all fire forward. Space outside was eerily still. The enemy was still minutes away, their lights growing brighter in the black. In that short window, the humans made every second count. Shield generators were pushed to their limits. Point defense cannons were aligned with surgical precision. Missile racks were loaded with their heaviest warheads. Ethan sent a private channel to Claire, his voice calm, when they close in. Aim for their forward frigates first. Break their teeth before they can bite. She nodded without hesitation, already passing the order down to her gunnery chief in the hangar. A pilot named Ray adjusted his helmet and muttered to the man beside him, "You ever think about how we get ourselves into these fights?" His wingmate smirked. "We don't get into them, Ray. We make them." The two laughed quietly, the sound quickly fading as the hangar doors began to open. Claire glanced at her helmsman. "Hold steady. Keep us in line with the flagship." "No." Drifting, the helmsman's hands tightened on the controls. The ship's engines hummed low, holding the Valar exactly where it needed to be. In the final moments before contact, the fleet's comm channels went silent. The preparation was over. The decisions had been made. Every human ship now waited for the shadow of the enemy to fall across them. Claire's heart pounded, but her voice, when she spoke, was like stone. "All stations, stand by to engage." And somewhere deep in the ship, the sound of weapons charging filled the air like the rumble of a distant storm. The humans were ready, not just to fight, but to fight harder than they ever had before. And in that quiet, before the first shot, it was clear they would not give up a single inch of space without a price that would shake the enemy to their core. The first sight of the enemy, fleet up close, was like watching a wall of fire and steel sweep through the dark. They didn't just arrive, they descended, their formation stretching so wide it seemed to swallow the stars behind them. Every ship bristled with weapons, glowing with the faint, menacing light of charged plasma cannons. Their engines burning bright as they closed the distance. Ethan's fleet held position, tight and unyielding. The humans had arranged themselves in a layered wall, battleships at the front, cruisers behind, carriers and command ships at the rear, every railgun, missile launcher, and beam cannon locked forward. When the first enemy salvo came, it was like a tidal wave of light tearing through the void. Bright blue and red streaks slammed into the outer shields of the human line. The impact rattled decks and made bulkheads groan. Two allied ships, both alien-built, took direct hits, their shields collapsing in seconds, explosions blooming across their hulls before they broke apart into spinning fragments. On Ethan's bridge, the deck shuddered under the shockwaves, but he didn't flinch. "Return fire," he ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. The fleet answered in unison. Railguns roared, their projectiles slicing through the void faster than the eye could follow. Missile tubes spat fire, and energy beams lanced across the black. The human formation lit up with a furious counterattack on the Valar. Claire Monroe stood with her hands gripping the edge of the command console. "Target their forward frigates. Focus fire on their shields," she commanded. The gunnery crew obeyed instantly, sending coordinated bursts that lit enemy hulls in brilliant flashes. One enemy frigate buckled under the assault, its armor peeling back before the ship erupted in a silent explosion, its pieces tumbling away into nothing. The destruction brought a cheer from the gunnery deck. But it was brief. The enemy pressed on. Fighters launched from both sides, swarming like angry insects in the empty void. Human interceptors darted between massive warships, weaving through the enemy's heavy fire, missile trails spiraling behind them. Inside one of those fighters, Ray's voice crackled over the squadron channel. "They're trying to flank you, Scott. Them off before they get a clear line on the carriers." His wingmate's laughter came back, sharp and fearless, on it. Then both fighters dove into the fray. Ethan's tactical officer called out from the side of the bridge, Enemy cruisers shifting to our starboard flank. Ethan didn't hesitate. Shift the ironclad in Washington to intercept, push them back. The battlefield was chaos now, space lit by explosions, shield flares, and streaks of plasma. But the human ships kept formation, holding the line. Even as the enemy tried to punch holes through it, Claire's ship took a glancing hit on the port side. The blast rocking the Valar and sending sparks raining from an overhead conduit. But her voice stayed calm. Damage control, seal it, and reroute power to the main batteries. She ordered each second felt like a lifetime. Each hit, each counterstrike, carrying the weight of lives, but through the chaos. There was something else, a rhythm, the humans adapting, striking with precision, defending with grit, fighting not just to survive, but to prove that they would not break, and as the enemy closed the gap even further, bringing the fight into deadly short range, Ethan knew the real test had only just begun. The moment where skill, courage, and sheer defiance would decide whether humanity's stand would become legend or be erased in silence. In the chaos of battle, the enemy pushed forward with brutal confidence. Their massive cruisers cutting through the void like predators closing in for the kill. They believed the humans were predictable, that they would keep firing head-on until they were overwhelmed. But Ethan had been planning something far more dangerous long before the first shot was fired. 4 hours before the enemy arrived, he had fed them carefully crafted false telemetry, letting them believe the human formation was weaker on one flank. The bait had worked. Now their heaviest cruisers were moving straight toward what they thought was an exposed gap. On the Washington, Captain Aaron Blake sat ready, his crew silent, waiting for the moment Ethan had promised would come. The ironclad floated alongside, its gun ports closed, shields steady, to anyone watching. They looked like ships simply holding the line, vulnerable. But when the enemy cruisers entered the kill zone, Ethan's voice came over the private channel, steady and cold. Now, in an instant, the Washington's main batteries erupted. Railgun shells slamming into the lead cruiser shields. Punching through with a blinding flash, the ironclad followed, firing a concentrated burst that tore straight through the enemy's forward decks. The trap closed tighter as two more human destroyers emerged from behind drifting wreckage. Their missile bays opening in unison, a storm of warheads streaked across the void, smashing into the enemy formation from the flank. 3 of the enemy's largest ships went up in silent, burning blossoms of light, their shattered hulls scattering into the dark for the first time in the battle. The enemy line wavered, their perfect advance broken across the comms. Fragments of alien voices broke through shock, disbelief, even anger. They had not expected the humans to pull off a coordinated ambush in the middle of a retreating battlefront. On the Valar, Claire saw the gap forming in the enemy's advance, and didn't hesitate. Push forward, make them feel it, she ordered, her gunners adjusting their aim to exploit the exposed ships still reeling from the trap. Ethan's fleet surged as one, no longer just holding the line, but driving into the breach they had created. The humans fought like a rising tide, turning the trap into a full counterattack in the blackness of space. The wreckage of enemy cruisers drifted among the stars, their firepower silenced. Their commanders forced to realize the truth: humans did not just resist, they struck back with precision and fury. The trap had worked. But Ethan knew this was only a momentary advantage. They had shaken the enemy's formation, yet the battle was far from over, and the hardest part was still ahead. Pushing forward meant stepping into the heart of the storm. The enemy fire grew heavier with every kilometer the human ships advanced. Plasma bolts and missile trails lit the black sky like a deadly fireworks display. But the fleet didn't slow. They pressed on, exchanging fire at ranges so close that every hit left scars across their hulls. The names of ships crackled over the comms. Followed by silence, another ally gone, another crew lost. Each disappearance hit like a punch to the chest. But there was no time to grieve, only to fight. On the Valor, a blast from an enemy destroyer smashed into Deck 6, tearing through the outer hull and filling the corridors with fire and smoke. Alarms screamed and bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off damaged sections. Still, Claire stood her ground on the bridge, her voice sharp. "Keep firing. Don't let them close the gap." Down in the hangar, the deck shook as fighters launched in rapid succession, pilots knowing some would not return. Their mission now as much about shielding the fleet as striking the enemy. They darted through space like sparks from a forge, weaving between explosions, cutting down enemy bombers before they could reach the larger ships. On the flagship, Ethan saw the Liberty, one of the smallest destroyers, throw itself directly in the path of an incoming missile barrage aimed at his ship. The Liberty's shields flared bright white, then shattered, the hull tearing apart in silence. Her sacrifice, leaving only drifting fragments, but it had saved the command ship. No one on the comm suggested retreat now. The thought had burned away in the fire of the battle. Every ship still fighting had committed fully. The humans were no longer defending a line, they were forcing their way into the enemy's teeth. Claire's gunners scored a direct hit on an enemy frigate's reactor core, the resulting explosion lighting up the forward view like a brief sunrise in the void. The cheer that rose on her bridge was short-lived, cut off by another shuddering impact as enemy rounds slammed into their shields. The cost of defiance was measured in wreckage and names, but Ethan knew that if they stopped now, that cost would have been for nothing. "Press on," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him, and the fleet obeyed, driving deeper into the killing field, determined to make every lost ship mean something the enemy would never forget. Just when the human fleet's ammunition stores were running dangerously low and their shields were holding by threads, a ripple tore through the Blacka hyperspace signature, massive and unfamiliar. Every gun on every surviving ship swung toward it, crews bracing for the worst. The enemy must have called in reinforcements. But when the vessel emerged, it wasn't marked with any known insignia. Its hull was a jagged mix of dark alloys and strange glowing seams. Shaped like a blade forged for war, the ship was colossal, easily twice the length of Ethan's flagship, bristling with weapons that no human had ever seen, some of them turning with a slow, deliberate menace as they powered up for one breathless moment. The entire battlefield seemed to pause, humans and enemies alike, staring into the void at Key. I braze out my void at Q, at Ward bistling with void at Key, warsling with Weather's breathling. My seas, my series. My seas is my seasons of my seas, my seas. My seas is to seed. Pred, my seed, by my seas is owied. By my rees, my waces ellis, by build it is. I can use at it to me we it lalik. Go I su I kite I kasu it to suko to me you believe kai ticket to be sit the sit good. It's called it's the let's staff secret of the protect the squid the potato inside the game and it's if this it's to buy that be a base it's basic means it's a miss this new arrival. Then, with no warning, the ship's forward batteries unleashed a storm of energy blast, snot at the humans. But at the enemy, columns of light cut through the nearest enemy battleships, punching holes straight through their armored hulls, reactors. Flaring before they burst apart, gasps and shouts filled the human comm channels. Who the hell are they? Someone asked, but no one had an answer. Ethan's private comm crackled, and an alien voice, deep and resonant, spoke directly to him. "We are not your allies, human. But we respect defiance." The channel went dead before Ethan could respond. Whoever they were, their firepower was devastating. Enemy cruisers scrambled to adjust. their tight formation breaking as they tried to avoid the newcomers' relentless strikes. The mysterious ship's arrival bought the humans precious minutes. Ethan wasn't going to waste. "Now's our chance," he ordered. "All ships, full charge, target their command line." Engines flared across the human fleet, hulls groaning under the strain as they surged forward. Weapons roaring with everything they had left. For the first time in the battle, the humans weren't just holding their ground, they were driving the enemy back. The tide beginning to turn under the combined storm of human grit and the fury of a stranger who owed them nothing, yet chose to stand beside them. The order to charge came like a spark in dry air. Human ships surged forward as one, engines blazing, hulls shaking from the strain. Their formation, no longer just a wallet, became a spear, aimed straight at the heart of the enemy fleet. There was no more cover, no room to maneuver. It was point-blank warfare, where every shot hit something, a key, and every mistake cost lives. The ironclad plowed ahead, its front armor ablaze, railguns pounding without pause, fire spilling from its sides as secondary reactors overloaded, but still, it did not fall back. It cleared a path for the fleet like a battering ram. On the Valar, Claire's voice was fierce. "Target their command ship. Bring it down." Her gunners obeyed with precision, unleashing a stream of focused fire that hammered into the enemy's core vessel. The enemy flagship loomed ahead, massive, powerful, and wrapped in layers of shielding. Each blow from the humans lit its surface with blue sparks, but it held. In the hangars, the last human fighters launched. Their numbers thinned, their pilots tired. But their aim was sharp. They darted between turrets, dropping torpedoes at close range, some vanishing in flashes of light, others breaking through to deliver killing strikes. Inside Ethan's command ship, the bridge was lit only by emergency lights, smoke in the air, but his voice never wavered. "Do not stop. This ends now." As the Valar closed in, Claire saw her moment. The enemy flagship's main shield flickered for half a second, just long enough. "Fire all forward cannons," she shouted. And the blast that followed rocked the ship to its core, a direct hit on the enemy's reactor housing. The impact cracked its armor, then split it wide. The enemy flagship exploded from within, fire and debris spilling into the void. What followed was chaos without their leader. The enemy fleet fractured. Some ships turned to flee, others kept fighting, driven by desperation or madness, but the humans didn't stop. They drove through the scattered enemy ranks like fire. Through dry grass, ship after ship, falling under their relentless assault. At last, the enemy line shattered completely. What was once an unstoppable armada now broke apart, fleeing into the black. The charge had worked, and the battle was turning, but it had come at a terrible cost. Silence fell across the battlefield like a heavy curtain, where once space had burned with fire and light. Now only drifting wreckage remained. Pieces of broken ships turned slowly in the void, some still glowing faintly with heat, others completely lifeless. On Ethan's bridge, only the soft hum of failing systems and the quiet buzz of static remained. His ears rang from the storm of battle. His face covered in sweat and soot, but his eyes stayed locked on the screen, watching as the last of the enemy ships vanished into hyperspace. "All enemy signals gone," whispered his tactical officer, voice hollow. Ethan didn't speak right away. He just breathed out slowly, as if his lungs had held that air since the first shot had been fired. The cost was visible in every direction. Dozens of human warships were gone, some vaporized in the fighting, others crippled beyond repair. The Liberty's remains floated near the edge of the formation, her nameplate spinning slowly through space like a tombstone. Claire stood on the battered bridge of the Valor, her arm wrapped in makeshift bandages, sparks still falling from damaged panels around her. The ship's lights flickered, but they Where still burning, she opened to come to Ethan's ship, her voice raspy but calm. "We're still here." Ethan nodded, though she couldn't see it. "We held," he said quietly. Damage reports poured in. Medical bays were full. Engineers fought to keep power flowing. Life support systems failing in some of the smaller ships, but no one complained. No one asked to retreat now. The enemy had come with overwhelming force and confidence, certain that humans would bend or break, but instead, they had found something far more dangerous. They had found a fleet that refused to run, that fought harder the more it bled. That didn't back down even when the stars themselves seemed to burn. Ethan looked at the shattered battlefield and knew this wasn't the end of the war, but it was something else. It was proof that humanity could not be told to fall back. Proof that when pushed to the edge, they would fight with everything they had left. "Let them remember this," Ethan said softly. His voice carried through the bridge. Claire replied after a long pause, her eyes on the stars beyond the wreckage. "They will." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by silence and ruin, the human fleet drifted beneath a cold sky, scarred but unbeaten, their story written in fire and steel, waiting for the next chapter to begin.